the case for using Cody Poteet, the case for trading Ryan Mountcastle, and the case for letting go of Jorge Mateo. All coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Wednesday, April 2nd, 2025, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode with the O's having the off day on Tuesday, we're going to get to some Orioles news and notes. We'll talk about the trade the Orioles made to get right-handed pitcher Cody Poteet. He has initially been sent to AAA Norfolk, but how he could help the Orioles this season. We'll talk about Gunnar Henderson, presumably is going to be back on Thursday. What is the roster move the Orioles will make and why they won't make this one, but why it should involve Jorge Mateo. And finally, some Ryan Mountcastle trade rumors over the weekend. We'll talk about why that could work out for the Orioles. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast. Before we get there, though, just did want to thank you for making Locked On Orioles your first podcast listen of the day as we jump into the season, now 5 games in, free and available wherever you listen to podcasts 5 days a week. Make sure to subscribe, leave a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It really, really helps out the show. And we're here on YouTube as well. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the Locked On Orioles YouTube page. And if you have any Orioles thoughts or feedback about the show, want to ask a question, a mailbag question, talk some ball, whatever it may be, you can always email me, lockedonorioles@gmail.com. But let's get into this news and notes episode, starting with the newest Baltimore Oriole. And that is 30-year-old right-handed pitcher Cody Poteet, who the Orioles acquired over the weekend in a small trade with the Chicago Cubs on Saturday, sending cash considerations to Chicago. Now, if you recognize the name Cody Poteet, it's probably for 2 reasons. One, he pitched for the Yankees last year, including 1 start against the Orioles in September. And 2, he was the only other player exchanged in the Cody Bellinger trade this offseason. When the Cubs basically salary dumped Bellinger to the Yankees, they got money and 1 player back, and that 1 player was right-handed pitcher Cody Poteet. Unfortunately for him, he did not make the Cubs opening day roster. And despite the fact that he does have minor league options and the Cubs initially just sent him down to AAA, they needed to make more space on their 40-man roster and ended up designating Poteet for assignment after that, which put him on waivers. The Orioles decided, let's skip the waiver line. Let's offer the Cubs some extra money and just get Poteet via trade. They did that and immediately optioned him down to AAA Norfolk. The Orioles had an open spot on their 40-man roster. Poteet fills it. And again, he does have 2 minor league option years remaining. So that is why he is able to begin in Norfolk. So let's talk about who is Cody Poteet. Again, a 30-year-old righty who was a 4th-round pick by the Marlins out of UCLA back in 2015. A really good UCLA team that was taken out in the regional round by my favorite Maryland Terrapins baseball team, potentially of all time. He debuted as a starter for the Marlins, made 7 starts in 2021, rejoined the Marlins again as a starter and a reliever throughout parts of the 2022 season. And then the elbow injury came, like it seemingly comes for every pitcher. He got Tommy John surgery in August of 2022. He was removed from the Marlins 40-man roster that offseason because they pretty much knew he was going to be out for the entirety of the 2023 season. They needed 40-man space, and he elected free agency that offseason, left the Marlins organization, and signed a minor league deal with the Royals. Now, the Royals knew he was going to be out for most of 2023. They still signed him just in case. He ended up coming back and pitching in minor league games in September, like right at the end of the 2023 season, but nothing where he was going to get close to coming back to the big leagues. And the Royals said, we're good with that. They did not bring him back on another deal. So he was healthy and coming off Tommy John, but needed a new team. And that is where the Yankees stepped in and somewhat surprisingly offered him a major league deal. Now, it was basically for the veteran minimum. It was a 1-year, $750,000 contract, but it was a big league contract that put him on their 40-man roster. Now, Poteet began the year in AAA Scranton Wilkes-Barre, but they had a doubleheader in April against the Guardians, did the Yankees. They called up Poteet as the 27th man to make a start. and he gave the Yankees 6 innings of 1-run ball. Now, they didn't have any space for him on the roster, so they sent him back down. But when they needed a starter again later in the year, he came up and made 3 really solid starts for the Yankees again in June. And then back came the injury bug. He had some tricep issues. He went on the IL on June 18th of last year with a right tricep strain. He came back in September, actually made 1 start against the Orioles in the final week of the season in that final series, right around when the Orioles clinched their playoff berth at Yankee Stadium. And that was it for him. Was not part of the Yankees postseason roster. He was kind of done from there, but he remained on the roster and then ended up getting traded for Cody Bellinger. Now, those starts that he made with the Yankees were pretty good. Like, he was okay in those first 19 appearances in the first 2 years with the Marlins. 5 appearances, 4 starts with the Yankees last year, 24 and a third innings. He posted a 2.22 ERA. That's pretty good. Now, it came with a 4.03 FIP and a 5.0 unexpected ERA. He had some good luck in that ERA because he was not missing bats. A 17% strikeout rate, very low to go along with about a league average 8% walk rate. But opponents did hit only 207 in those 24 big league innings for Poteet last year. Now, in terms of what he throws, if you are watching on the Locked On Orioles YouTube page, you'll see the Cody Poteet pitch mix from the 2024 season. It's a 5-pitch mix. It's a 4-seam fastball. He throws the most at about 93 miles per hour. Not super big velocity, not great stuff. Plus, his most used pitch does get hit hard. There was also a sinker he threw a lot of the time, 24%, also 93 miles an hour. You combine those 2 fastballs, that was 53% of his usage last year in the big leagues were fastballs. Beyond that, there's a changeup. That is his number 1 most used pitch against lefties. He throws it about a third of the time against left-handed hitters at about 87 miles an hour. Then there's his sweeper. It is his best stuff offering. It has the most movement. It has a 110 stuff plus. That's the pitch that teams like the best. And then there's a pretty solid kind of slower 78 mile per hour curveball that he throws in there. That pitch got the best swings and misses at the big league level, but none of his pitches had over a 20% whiff rate in the majors last year, which is a fairly low rate for your best strikeout pitches. And that is why he didn't get a lot of swings and misses, didn't get a lot of Ks in general, because he just kind of didn't have that out pitch last year. Now, in AAA, he did get more swing and miss. Actually, 4 of his pitches were over 26% whiff rate, and his 4-seam fastball swung and missed at 30% of the time, which is really, really good for a 4-seamer. So there's definitely kind of some sort of interesting movement profile. It's not a lot of a crazy amount of that rising action. It has a little bit of it, that 4-seamer, but nothing absurd, nothing extreme. It's just something with his arm angle that makes his 4-seam fastball pretty good and continues to get him jobs around the league. Now, this spring with the Cubs, his velocity was a little up, which was nice. Otherwise, not a lot of tweaks to his pitches. The only big change was he didn't throw that sinker at all in spring training. All of his fastballs with the 4-seamer seemingly went away from that second fastball as that sinker. Now, the question also is, okay, how does he fit in with the Orioles? Because he was immediately optioned to AAA Norfolk. Well, he will more than likely join the Tides rotation, and the Tides right now don't really have like 6 true starters, so Poteet will certainly help with that, but he's just more than minor league depth. He could be an option for the Orioles at some point this season. He's kind of more of a sum of his parts guy than anything else, kind of a closer to a Dean Kramer type, a Kyle Gibson type, where it's not one mega great out pitch. It's more, hey, I throw 5 or 6 pitches, I'll throw the kitchen sink at you. He's got pretty solid command to add in there as well, so he can throw the pitches where he wants, and that's how he gets outs, and that's how he posted a 2 ERA in those 5 outings last year. And as I mentioned, 2 minor league option years remaining, which gives him a good amount of roster flexibility, and he immediately becomes really good starting pitching depth to have, because as the season goes on, the Orioles are going to get more and more depth back on this team. But right now, Chase McDermott on the injured list, Grayson Rodriguez on the injured list, Trevor Rogers on the injured list, Albert Suarez on the injured list. Those are 4 of the Orioles' top 9 starting pitching options beginning the year. And the Orioles did sign Kyle Gibson, but he's still building up. They're kind of targeting somewhere around May 1st that he would be ready to go, but he's not going to be ready quite yet. Hasn't even gotten into any games in AAA Norfolk at this point. So right now, with Cody Poteet going through a full spring training, kind of rearing and ready to go, I would call him at the moment, especially with now Suarez on the IL as well, I would call Poteet the Orioles' number 6 starting pitcher right now. You have their 5 who are in the rotation, Eflin, Morton, Kramer, Sugano, and Povich. And Suarez was the number 6. He was the long man in the pen. He's on the IL. I would say before Poteet, then Brandon Young, who is kind of the top starter in AAA Norfolk and is on the 40-man roster right now, but has yet to make his major league debut, would have been the number 6 starter. But with Poteet, who has pitched in parts of 3 different big league seasons and had success for the Yankees in the AL East last year, and Young, who's never thrown a big league pitch, I think the Orioles would put Poteet ahead of Young in the pecking order. And all that means is if the Orioles had another starter go down right now, or they had a weird doubleheader, or they just needed a spot start, Cody Poteet would be the guy they would call on right now. And that is why this move is huge. There's a situation where they don't use Poteet all year. They get more depth back. They stay healthier. They just don't need him. But there's also a case where the Orioles really need him for a little bit early in the season until guys like Gibson and McDermott and Rogers and obviously Grayson Rodriguez are ready to go. Grayson being a main starter, the other guys providing that depth for the rotation. They just kind of don't have it right now. Cody Poteet is a huge addition there. And it doesn't feel like a big addition because it's like he's in AAA. They don't need him. But if in a couple days Charlie Morton starts to feel something, if Sugano's hand cramps maybe cause him to miss his next start, all of a sudden it is huge to have Cody Poteet, because instead of calling up Brandon Young to make his major league debut, you've got a guy in Poteet who has made, it's not a lot of them, but has made 13 big league starts previously, has that under his belt, can turn to that. He's thrown 83 major league innings, at the very least, with a 3.80 ERA. At the very least, he has that. And being able to turn to that, I think, makes you feel a little bit better in a spot start situation. So depth, you don't need it until you need it. The Orioles have done a fantastic job this offseason compiling depth. We've already seen that depth have to step in for the O's. This is another move like that in Poteet, who, and clearly, if the Yankees liked him enough to give him a major league deal coming off Tommy John, there's certainly something there that the Orioles will try to exploit, and at least with the options he has, have him hang around for a while as depth for the Orioles rotation. But Poteet, unless they need him, probably not going to come up soon. We do know someone who's on the Norfolk roster right now that is going to come up soon, and that is Gunnar Henderson. He is almost ready to finally make his big league debut in 2025 after starting the year on the injured list. The question is, who loses their roster spots when Gunnar comes back? We will discuss that question coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Wonderful Pistachios. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. Now, personally, I am a fan of the classic variety, the in-shell options. I love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch. But many love the no-shells variety. Perfect grab-and-go snack with amazing flavors as well. Whether you're running between meetings, dropping off the kids, Wonderful Pistachios, it's a snack that works as hard as you do. So get snackin' and get crackin' with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. So we move things on to Gunnar Henderson. Latest update we got on Monday was a good one from Orioles manager Brandon Hyde, that Henderson, who began the year on the injured list with a mild intercostal strain, it was something he was dealing with from early in spring training, didn't play in games most of the second half of spring, was trying to come back, but just ran out of time and had to start the year on the injured list. Of course, the best player on this Orioles team finished 4th in AL MVP voting last year. The offense has been good, but it'll be even better when Gunnar Henderson rejoins it, hopefully later this week. And because the Orioles were able to backdate his 10-day IL stint by a couple days, he is eligible to come off the injured list tomorrow, Thursday, April 3rd, for the final game of the series between the Orioles and the Red Sox. So today's game could be the final game the O's have to play without Gunnar Henderson. Now, it's not confirmed that he will come off the IL Thursday. There's a chance that it takes him a few more days. That is totally possible at this point. But Hyde saying they're expecting him back Thursday is a really, really good sign, because they're going to be careful with an MVP candidate in Henderson, making sure he is fully healthy, ready to go, not in a lot of risk of re-injuring it when they are officially going to bring him back to the big league roster. Now, a couple of days ago, there was a big conversation going around Orioles land of what the O's would do when Gunnar came back, because we figured for a while that Jorge Mateo, coming off the Tommy John surgery, would also start the year on the injured list. And then all of a sudden, Mateo got himself ready for opening day. Henderson didn't, and Mateo took his spot on the opening day roster. So it was like, well, about a week from now, the Orioles have all these guys who they plan to be on their opening day roster. Someone's got to lose their spot for Gunnar to come back. They're not going to go one pitcher less. You want as many arms as you can have. 13 is the maximum. So a hitter's got to get set down. And it was, well, they could DFA Ramon Urias or Ramon Laureano, maybe DFA Jorge Mateo himself, or option Heston Kjerstad or Jackson Holliday down to AAA. Well, now it's a little bit different because there's another player on the injured list. Colton Cowser, unfortunately, with that fractured thumb that he suffered Sunday in Toronto, he is on the injured list. Brandon Hyde said he expects him to miss at least 6 to 8 weeks before Cowser returns. Dylan Carlson was called up to the big leagues to take Cowser's spot on the roster. And now it's like, well, you have it out because Dylan Carlson was starting the year in AAA anyway. He has minor league options. You could easily on Thursday just send Carlson right back down where he started. That opens up the roster spot for Gunnar Henderson, and you can at least kick this can down the road, especially in terms of the Jorge Mateo decision. And I really think it would have been, had Cowser still been healthy, it would have been the Jorge Mateo decision because Kjerstad's a big enough part of the team, especially now with Cowser out, and Holliday's a big enough part of the team. You didn't want to option them. Urias is great depth. The Orioles signed Ramon Laureano to a one-year deal for a reason. You don't want to DFA him a week into the season. It just felt like Jorge Mateo was the true option to get DFA'd and lose his roster spot as another shortstop with Henderson coming in. But now with the Cowser injury, you can kick that can down the road. And honestly, I think the Orioles are just going to option Dylan Carlson down to AAA. Mateo stays. He's your second backup infielder. He's a backup outfielder for you as well because he played the outfield last year. He can play a little bit against lefties, but mostly comes off the bench. He can pinch run for you. And I guess, if he's only starting maybe once a week, he's coming off the bench for you. I'm fine with Mateo in that role for a while. If he's not starting a lot, if he's just more of a full-time bench piece, I'm okay if he is still on this Orioles roster. The reason him being there worries me is that they're going to play him more often than that. And he really doesn't deserve to do that. And that kind of brings me to this point goes off a little bit less now that Cowser's on the IL, right? Now that the Carlson option is kind of the easiest move the Orioles can make. And again, is the move I think they will make on Thursday. But I'm still going to make the case for, even with Cowser on the IL, that the Jorge Mateo DFA is the correct move when Henderson comes back. And you either just keep Dylan Carlson or you call up someone like Livan Soto instead to take that final roster spot on the roster. First of all, Jorge Mateo is not needed for the starting lineup at any time. He should never play against righties. He only did so this weekend because Hyde was trying to get everybody a start at least once, and then Westberg was banged up on Sunday, which allowed Mateo to start. But it's a career 69 WRC plus with a 57 WRC plus last year against right-handed pitching. That is abysmal. That should not be in the lineup at all against righties. Now, to be fair to Mateo, he did have a 127 WRC plus against lefties last year. He was certainly an impact hitter against left-handed pitching at times last season. But this is what the Orioles can send out there against a lefty, even without Jorge Mateo. Westberg leads off at second, Rutschman catching, Henderson at shortstop, O'Neill in left, Mountcastle at first, Kjerstad at DH, Urias at third, Mullins in center, Ramon Laureano in right field. And for a lot of these games, the Orioles are going to line it up with where Gary Sanchez is catching when a left-handed pitcher is on the mound so he can hit against a lefty, and then Rutschman is your DH. So that pushes either Kjerstad or Mullins, who maybe you want to hide a little bit against lefties, who both did start against the lefty Sean Newcomb on Monday against the Red Sox. And some of that's because you were kind of getting new guys in there. Mullins swinging it well. You wanted to get Kjerstad another start. But at the very least, if Sanchez is starting against a lot of your lefties, then even then, you only have to choose one of Kjerstad or Mullins to play in the lineup. And I think if you have two lefties in your lineup, one is Gunnar Henderson, and another one is either Mullins or Kjerstad against a left-handed starter, you're probably okay with that. And most likely it'll be Mullins if, Kjerstad is down because the DH spot is filled. You're going to put Mullins in center field just to give you that good outfield defense. And you only have to play one of those two guys. Now, Mateo was good last year against lefties, but in his career, still a 94 WRC plus, still below average against left-handed pitching. So maybe you want to play him like in center field against lefties over Cedric Mullins. Maybe that's where you could start him, because I would rather have Westberg, Henderson, and Arias all in those infield spots against lefties over Mateo. They all are just better hitters, and they all hit lefties really well. So maybe you'd throw Mateo back in center where he got a few starts last year. I mean, he's played 213 career big league innings in the outfield, and metrically he's done okay. I mean, he looks not great, not terrible, just kind of okay out there. But if the one opening against a lefty for Mateo to start is in center, you can easily just give it to Mullins. I know I've talked about him not playing against lefties, but with Cowser out, I'd still rather give it to Mullins. Or honestly, you can just roster Dylan Carlson, a switch hitter who is much better against lefties, a career 122 WRC plus hitter against lefties, much better than Mateo, and he's an actual outfielder. So you could just play Carlson in center field if you still want to sit Mullins against those left-handers, and there's really no need for Jorge Mateo. Like, in over 1,200 plate appearances with the Orioles since Baltimore claimed Mateo off waivers in 2021, he is hitting 226 with a 272 on base, a 373 slugging. That is an 80 WRC plus. He has been 20% worse than league average in that long stretch, with a 5% walk rate, a 25% strikeout rate, just a 35% hard hit rate. He's just not a productive hitter. And the defense, while still solid, is going down. He is no longer that elite Gold Glove level shortstop we saw back in 2022. He's just not that player anymore. He made 3 errors over the weekend when he was playing shortstop in those 2 games in Toronto. I don't see the need for him anymore. And I love what Jorge Mateo has given to the Orioles at times here, but if they cut him loose, he's out of options. That's why they haven't done it yet. They have to put him on waivers, kind of offer him up to every other team at this point. But if he clears waivers, he doesn't have to accept a AAA assignment. He could become a free agent. I think the Orioles are scared of losing him. But I personally think he would just clear waivers. And maybe if he does, he would think the Orioles are still the best fit for me to get playing time. I'll go to AAA for a bit and wait for them to call on me. And the Orioles did add a club option for $3.5 million onto his contract for 2026. He was originally set to become a free agent after this year. And if a team claims him on waivers, they have to pick up the $3 million this year and have that club option on it for next year, which they could easily decline, but it's still something they're going to think about. And I mean, just try for a little bit, especially if you are watching here on the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. Wipe all of this from your mind for a moment and just think about the Orioles claiming players off waivers. If the Orioles saw this player on waivers on this Baseball Savant page showing here on the YouTube channel, all this blue, all these poor numbers, nothing offensively is even, this is 2024 page, is even up at league average except for his bat speed, right? The defense is league average. The hitting is well below average. Yeah, the base running value is good. Yeah, we know he still has 99th percentile sprint speed, and that's a big part of what Jorge Mateo can do for you. Did pinch run and steal a base on Monday. But is this a player that you saw coming over the waiver wire if you were the Orioles that you would say, yeah, the O's should claim him? I don't think it is at all. And you combine that with the fact that this guy last year at the big league level, his most recent statistics, 68 games, 208 plate appearances, and 87 WRC plus. He slashed 229, 267, 401. You add that up with that Savant page, that's not a player I'm trying to claim on waivers. So why would another team claim him? Maybe a really bad team would go after him, but I don't think he really fits on a good team with the Orioles anymore. Mateo, I think, has run his course with the bad Orioles, and they've pushed away guys like Hayes and Mancini and Santander, and they were all way better with the O's. And I know there's a lot of history with Jorge Mateo, and I know the Orioles will argue he fills a role as a bench player. And I know now with Cowser out, they're going to just make the move that is much easier. Carlson back to AAA, Mateo stays, and Henderson is back. But just where does he fit? Like, Mateo's worse than all those guys. And if they feel like they do need an extra infielder, because if they do go with Carlson instead of Mateo, it's an extra outfielder. Carlson just plays the outfielder. Mateo, in theory, plays both the infield and the outfield. So I get that versatility. You have 2 guys in Livan Soto and Luis Vasquez, who are in AAA, who both had really good springs, are really versatile, good defenders who can handle the bat. And Soto can also play the outfield if you need him to. You could arguably, I think, have a better version of Mateo who's just not as fast in Levon Soto that you could call up right now. You could send down Carlson, you could DFA Mateo, call up Soto, activate Henderson. There's your roster. I think it still fits better than having Mateo on this team. That's just what I believe. And again, I think the Orioles are going to keep him around and kick the can down the road until, Cowser does come back and maybe the team's still fully healthy then in May or June. And then they have to make this decision on Jorge Mateo. I just think the Mateo thing has run its course. But let me know if you think I'm wrong right here in the Locked On Orioles YouTube comments. Do you think Mateo should be gone with this move, or do you just think they'll option Carlson and rock it as business as usual? I just think at this point, we are kind of past the point of Jorge Mateo truly filling a role on this Orioles team. But there still could be roster openings and maybe another roster opening if somebody else goes down with injury or somebody else gets traded. Maybe Ryan Mountcastle getting dealt. Talk about that to finish off the show. Coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Monarch Money. Do you ever check your bank account and wonder where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and you start actually building wealth. And when you start using Monarch, you realize how much you're spending on things like food delivery. Now you can budget smarter and save more. And instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch Money to check your finances, track your spending, and even plan your long-term goals. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONMLB for half off that first year. So to finish off today's episode, I wanted to briefly talk about a Ryan Mountcastle rumor and report from the weekend. Bob Nightingale over at USA Today, and yes, I know it is Bob Nightingale, so you take it with a grain of salt, but he reported over the weekend that the Orioles are open to trade offers for Ryan Mountcastle. And although it is Bob Nightingale, it does kind of make sense for this team. Ryan Mountcastle is set to be a free agent after next year, after 2026. He's making about $7 million this year. That'll go up anywhere from like $8 to $10 million for his final year in arbitration in 2026. And we know the Orioles were also talking with teams and open to offers about Mountcastle at the 2024 trade deadline. So it's nothing brand new if this is the case, and I'm sure it is with the Orioles, because we're getting to the point where a player like Mountcastle might start being phased out of this lineup. Now, one of the reasons for the O's not to trade him last year, the deadline, or more specifically this offseason, was because they decided after 3 years to move the left field wall back in some, and a wall that certainly took away a lot of home runs from Ryan Mountcastle over the past 3 seasons is coming back in. His home runs year over year have gone 33 homers the last year of the old wall, then 21, then 18, then 13. Like, it is certainly having an impact on Ryan Mountcastle. And it was not just in the home run numbers, it was in how he was approaching the ball. Now, he was still a solid hitter, 108 WRC plus, hit 271 last year, 425 slugging. He was still solidly above league average as a hitter for the last 3 seasons with that new wall, but nothing like he could have been with better dimensions for the way he is a big-time power hitter from the right side. And it really changed how he approached things. He had the second lowest pull rate in all of Major League Baseball among qualified hitters last year at just a 27.9% pull rate. That is minuscule for a guy with as much bat speed and exit velocity and just pull side power in the air that Ryan Mountcastle has and has shown time and time again in his Major League career. I get that it wasn't as good an idea to pull the ball in the air towards that left field wall, but there were 81 games on the road with better ballparks, and he still wasn't pulling the ball. The hope was that with the wall coming back in, he could kind of change it back, and because he has such that elite bat speed, and so far it's been better, right? It's been just 5 games. Mountcastle hasn't even played in all of them, but his 50% pull rate is second on the team, is almost double what it was last year. Again, small sample size, 5 games. But his 33% fly ball rate is actually lowest on the team among qualified hitters, so still something to watch, still hitting the ball on the ground too often. And he's still only 28. There is still value there to the Orioles, to other teams, but the O's may want to clear up some space to get a guy like Coby Mayo some real at-bats in the big leagues, or even get a guy like Heston Kjerstad more ABs, especially when Colton Cowser does come back. I mean, right now, Kjerstad's going to get everyday ABs, but it's going to be mushy again when Cowser gets healthy. So that opens up some things for guys like Kjerstad, guys like Mayo, even Samuel Basayo down the line to DH and play some first base. And even with Mountcastle still being just below league average against righties last year, not terrible, I'm still not sure he's a guy who's in the lineup every day no matter what. We've kind of already seen that from Brandon Hyde and the Orioles. He's going to be mixed in. So if the O's did try to trade Mountcastle at this point, what would an offer look like? And I really think the Nathaniel Lowe trade that was made this offseason between the Rangers and the Nationals is something we can make a comparison to. Lowe is a couple years older. He is 30 years old. He's also a left-handed hitter and not a righty, but he had 2 years of team control left. That's basically what Ryan Mountcastle has at this point. A little bit older again, but a slightly better hitter. He's had better seasons in his career, but he doesn't have the power ceiling that Ryan Mountcastle has. Lowe hits the ball on the ground a lot. 20 home runs probably be the maximum for a player like that. Mountcastle, right ballpark, right approach, could hit 35 plus home runs. That's kind of the difference between the two players. Lowe is a really good defensive first baseman, but Mountcastle was Gold Glove finalist last year. He has closed that gap there. You can certainly, I think, trust him now as a first base defender. And Mountcastle is cheaper. Lowe's making like $10 million this year, probably 12 or 13 next year. Mountcastle making less. What the Rangers got back when they traded him to the Nationals was 28-year-old left-handed reliever Robert Garcia. Now, Garcia was an interesting arm, had 4 years of team control remaining, did have a 4.22 ERA in about 60 innings with the Nationals last year in his first full big league season, but it was with good peripherals. He had a 30% strikeout rate, 6% walk rate. His 2.38 FIP was almost 2 runs lower than his ERA. FIP is a stat that kind of takes most stuff out of it except for home runs, walks, strikeouts, and takes the ballpark into account. Gives a truer outing of what a pitcher's ERA should be in like a normal ballpark in normal conditions with a normal defense. That's one of the largest ERA FIP gaps in Major League Baseball last year. So Robert Garcia, basically a reliever with 4 years of control with good stuff from the left side, poised for a breakout. And although Lowe might be overall a little bit more valuable than Mountcastle, so the O's would probably get someone maybe a step down from Robert Garcia, it is certainly a comparable trade. And the two guys I looked at, and really, let's just keep it to one guy, because the San Francisco Giants could absolutely use someone like Ryan Mountcastle. They are projected to be 23rd best by Fangraphs at first base this year. Lamont Wade's about to be a free agent. They want to bridge the gap to Bryce Eldridge, one of their top prospects. How about left-handed pitcher Eric Miller for Mountcastle straight up in a trade? Miller, a lefty out of the Giants bullpen, who also has 4 years of team control remaining, had a 3.88 ERA in 67 innings of work at the big leagues last year. Really good 31% strikeout rate. 13% walk rate is a little concerning. It's a 97 mile per hour fastball from the left side with a wipeout slider. There's some things to work on with the command, but he would be a perfect replacement and honestly upgrade in the bullpen over CNL Perez if the Orioles went and got him right now. I think it's a trade that could work out for both teams. If we got any Giants fans out there or you know Giants fans, ask them, hey, Eric Miller from Mountcastle, maybe the Orioles could throw in another low-level prospect to just sweeten the deal to make that happen. But I think a deal like that, swapping big leaguers, helping two teams trying to get to the playoffs, just like that Lowe for Garcia trade, is very, very possible. And if the Orioles got an offer like that, something like a pitcher like Eric Miller, I think they could pull the trigger on a Mountcastle trade, a little more Kjerstad, a little more O'Hearn, maybe get Kobe Mayo up to the big leagues to be that right-handed hitting first baseman, get him another shot in the bigs, and maybe with them getting an arm and still a great offense without Mountcastle could help the team moving forward. I'm totally fine keeping Mountcastle. He's going to be a helpful part of this lineup, but if they can upgrade the roster, especially on the pitching side with a deal like that, I would say the Orioles go ahead and make that swap if it comes your way. That'll do it for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. O's, of course, had the off day on Tuesday, but are back in action on Wednesday night. Game 2 of 3 between the Orioles and the Red Sox, and the Aces are scheduled at least to go back to the Hill in this one. 6:35 Eastern Time start. Zach Eflin for the Orioles against Garrett Crochet, the lefty Red Sox big trade acquisition who just signed a 5-year extension with the Red Sox on Monday to stay in Boston. See if the O's can keep it up and start 2-0 at home. And then I will be back with you on Thursday recapping everything you need to know from Game 2 between the O's and the Sox and any Gunnar Henderson updates we might have, as hopefully he'll be back in the lineup Thursday. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.